This document changes everything. You have to comply.
Comply? This is our land. Your program is nothing. It's peaceful. Look around.
Funerals had a way of exposing the truth about a person's finances. And in this case, the truth was painfully simple. There wasn't much. The bank account was thin. The old pickup needed repairs. Rent was already 3 months behind. The plan had been modest and practical. Drive out, settle the estate, sell whatever was left of the old mountain property, and buy a little breathing room. Nothing about the situation suggested life was about to flip completely upside down. The 12-hour drive from Ohio to the Colorado mountains felt longer than it should have. The farther the narrator drove, the more the landscape changed. From crowded highways to winding mountain roads lined with tall pine and fading autumn leaves. It smelled clean out there. Cold. Quiet. Too quiet. The family cabin appeared exactly where memory said it would be, sitting stubbornly against a mountainside like it had refused to age properly. Dust coated the windows. The porch sagged slightly, but the place still stood, which was more than anyone expected. Inside, time had frozen. Ezra's coffee mug still sat on the kitchen table. His reading glasses rested beside a stack of hand-drawn survey maps that looked older than most of the houses back in Ohio. The air smelled like pine sap, old leather, and something faintly metallic. The scent of a life lived carefully and quietly. For decades, the family had told the same story about Ezra Brennan. He was the one who blew it. Back in 1952, while smarter investors bought land near growing cities, Ezra had spent $3,200 on what everyone called worthless mountain wilderness. Pine trees, elk trails, nothing useful, nothing profitable. At every family gathering, someone eventually brought it up, usually with a shake of the head and a comment about poor financial decisions. The narrator had believed it too, until the paperwork started telling a different story. At first, it was just curiosity, sorting through folders, checking deeds, matching parcel numbers. But the deeper the narrator dug into the documents, the stranger things started to feel. The acreage numbers were enormous. The boundary description stretched far beyond what anyone in the family had ever mentioned. Then came the sound that changed everything. Gravel crunching outside, followed by the sharp, rhythmic click of expensive heels climbing the cabin steps with the confidence of someone who believed they owned the mountain. The woman who appeared on the porch looked perfectly assembled and completely out of place. Mid-50s, immaculate blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, designer everything. Behind her in the driveway sat a pristine luxury SUV that probably cost more than the cabin itself. Her expression carried the polished irritation of someone used to being obeyed. She introduced herself as the president of the Pinnacle Ridge Homeowners Association, and from the very first sentence, it was clear she wasn't there to welcome anyone. Her eyes moved past the narrator and locked onto the old work truck parked beside the cabin. The disapproval was immediate and theatrical. According to her, the vehicle was an eyesore, a violation, a threat to property values for the 847 homeowners in the community. 847. The number quietly lodged itself in the narrator's mind, because there was only one problem. No one in the Brennan family had ever sold development rights to this mountain. While the HOA president continued her polished lecture about community standards and enforcement authority, the narrator's attention drifted back to the survey maps still sitting on the kitchen table. Something about the boundary lines was starting to itch at the back of the brain. Something didn't add up. The woman eventually handed over an official-looking violation notice, complete with HOA seal and a 72-hour compliance warning. Her smile was thin and satisfied, the expression of someone who believed the situation was already handled. Before leaving, she delivered one final comment, casual, dismissive, and dripping with practiced superiority. Then she was gone, her luxury SUV gliding down the mountain road like she owned every inch of it. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. That was when the narrator went back inside and really looked at the maps. What seemed like random survey paperwork now looked very different under careful attention. Parcel lines stretched far beyond the cabin, way beyond. The acreage numbers were staggering once properly traced. And when the narrator overlaid the modern county parcel viewer onto Ezra's original 1952 survey, the blood ran cold. Because sitting squarely inside the inherited property boundaries was an entire master plan neighborhood. Pinnacle Ridge, all 847 homes, all the manicured streets, all the pristine lawns, all of it. For 15 straight years, someone had been building, selling, and collecting money on land that, according to every original document that mattered, still legally belonged to the Brennan family. The wind moved through the pines outside with a low, steady whisper. Inside the cabin, surrounded by decades-old paperwork, the narrator slowly realized something that made the situation far more dangerous than anyone in that polished HOA could possibly imagine. They hadn't just annoyed the wrong property owner. They had built an entire empire on land that was never truly theirs. And very soon, someone was going to have to answer for it. The morning after the inheritance stopped feeling like luck. It started with a map, not just any map, but the kind printed on thick survey paper, the kind with crisp boundary lines that carried legal weight. It arrived folded inside a large envelope from the county records office, along with a brief note confirming what the previous documents had suggested. The land was real, the acreage was accurate, and the ownership was fully transferred. 1,000 acres. On paper, it was clean, simple, almost boring. In reality, it was anything but. The first thing that stood out wasn't what was there. It was what wasn't. There were gaps, strange little inconsistencies in the boundary lines that didn't make sense. At first glance, they looked like normal survey adjustments, the kind that happen when land is divided and sold over decades. But the longer the map was studied, the more those lines began to feel wrong. Too neat in some places, too messy in others. And in one particular section near the southern boundary, the lines didn't just look off. They overlapped. That was the moment the quiet unease from the day before turned into something sharper, something that demanded answers. By late morning, the decision was made to see the property in person. Paper only told part of the story. Land had a way of revealing the truth the moment boots hit dirt. The drive out was longer than expected. The road narrowed gradually, trading smooth asphalt for cracked rural pavement, then finally for a dusty access road that cut through wide open fields. The farther the journey went, the more the surroundings shifted from suburban order to rural sprawl. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt off. The first fence appeared about a mile in, old with posts, weathered wire, leaning slightly from years of neglect. It matched the survey's western boundary almost perfectly. That part, at least, made sense. But the deeper the drive continued, the stranger things became. Because the second fence didn't match the map at all. It was newer, cleaner, installed with the kind of precision that suggested recent work. The posts were straight, the wire was tight, and most importantly, it cut several yards inside the inherited boundary line. At first, it was easy to assume it was a mistake. Maybe a neighboring rancher had guessed wrong. Maybe an old subdivision plan had shifted over time. But then the rooftops appeared, neat rows of them, uniform, planned, intentional. The HOA neighborhood. Even from a distance, it was obvious this wasn't some accidental overlap. The houses sat in clean suburban curves, with trim lawns and identical driveways forming a pattern that screamed professional development, and part of it was sitting where it absolutely should not have been. The car rolled to a slow stop along the dirt shoulder. For a long moment, nothing moved. The air was still. The neighborhood in the distance looked calm, almost too calm, like a picture-perfect postcard dropped into the wrong place. That's when the scale of the situation really began to sink in. This wasn't just a fence problem. This wasn't just a paperwork error. This was an entire planned community that appeared to be occupying land it didn't legally own. And if the survey was right, and the county records were rarely wrong, this situation hadn't happened overnight. This had been sitting here, quietly, for years. A slow walk along the fence line confirmed what the map had hinted at. The boundary markers on the inherited property were older but consistent. Metal survey stakes still sat partially buried in the soil, their stamp numbers matching the legal description from the documents. They hadn't moved, which meant the newer fence had, and someone had placed it very deliberately. The farther along the line the inspection went, the clearer the pattern became. The HOA development hadn't just brushed against the property. It had pushed into it, carefully, strategically, just enough to matter. By mid-afternoon, the uneasy feeling had evolved into something colder, more focused, the kind of realization that starts forming a plan whether someone wants it to or not. Because land disputes weren't small problems, and HOAs weren't known for backing down quietly. But facts were facts. Boundaries were boundaries. And if the paperwork held up, and every piece of evidence so far suggested it would, then the quiet suburban neighborhood in the distance was sitting on borrowed ground. Very expensive borrowed ground. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the fields, one thing became very clear. This discovery wasn't going to stay quiet for long, and the HOA had no idea what was coming. The moment the electric fence went up, the neighborhood erupted in chaos. Sarah, the HOA president, wasn't going to let this slide. By sunrise, she had rallied a group of her cronies, armed with clipboards, cameras, and a list of violations she had conjured overnight. Mark, still nursing his bruised pride from the last confrontation, knew this would escalate, but he wasn't backing down. He paced along his property line, eyeing the drone hovering above. The HOA always seemed to have one filming their every move. Mark, this is unacceptable. Sarah shouted from across the fence, pointing aggressively, her voice carrying over the morning silence. That fence violates 3 HOA rules, the neighborhood covenants, and possibly the city code. Mark raised his hands, smirking despite the adrenaline rushing through him. Really? Because the last time I checked, this is MY property and MY land. You want to find me? Go ahead. I'll see you in court. The tension exploded when one of Sarah's assistants, a tall man with a clipboard, stepped onto Mark's lawn, snapping photos of the fence. Without thinking, Mark grabbed a garden hose and aimed it at the intruder. Dripping water, a warning shot of defiance. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some whispered support, others whispered fear. A small dog barked furiously, circling Mark's legs as if sensing the storm. Just when it seemed the confrontation couldn't get more chaotic, a loud crash came from the side yard. One of the HOA members tripped over a loose plank of Mark's fence, sending papers flying like confetti in the wind. Sarah shrieked, furious. This is harassment. Trespassing. You'll pay for this. Mark's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was a war of wills, a test of who would dominate this small suburban battlefield. And Mark had a secret plan he hadn't revealed yet. As the sun climbed higher, the neighborhood became a battleground of shouts, legal threats, and daring stunts. Drones hovered overhead, capturing every angle for the HOA's evidence, while Mark maneuvered strategically, refusing to give an inch. By the end of the day, it was clear. Chapter 3 had set the stage for an all-out war. No one was backing down, and the fence was no longer just metal and wire. It was a symbol of resistance, a symbol of defiance, a symbol that Mark's fight for his land had only just begun. The morning sun cut through the haze of suburban calm, revealing the aftermath of the previous day's chaos. Mark's electric fence had survived, but the tension in the neighborhood had reached a boiling point. Sarah, the HOA president, was fuming. She stormed into Mark's driveway with a megaphone, flanked by 2 neighbors wielding cameras. This is illegal. You can't just do whatever you want, she yelled, her voice echoing down the cul-de-sac. Mark, standing confidently behind the fence, smirked. Funny, I checked the records. Everything I'm doing is completely legal. And you're trespassing on my property right now. The neighbors gasped as Sarah hesitated, realizing Mark wasn't bluffing, but she wasn't one to back down. With a dramatic gesture, she motioned for the cameras to zoom in, planning to capture evidence against him. In response, Mark reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small motion-activated sprinkler he had installed near the property line. The moment the cameras approached, water sprayed in their direction. Chaos erupted. Sarah shouted. The neighbors slipped on wet grass, and the dog barked like a tiny alarm system, circling Mark's feet. Mark's heart raced, but he stayed calm. This was more than just a fence. It was a statement. He was sending a message. No intimidation, no threats could force him off his land. Then came the most daring move. Mark quietly opened a hidden side gate and positioned the drone, already programmed to fly over property. The drone's camera captured everything. The HOA's chaotic retreat, their slips and stumbles, and Sarah's furious expression. This footage, Mark knew, would be his ace in court. By sunset, the neighborhood had turned into a battlefield of shouts, water sprays, and flashing cameras. The HOA had escalated, and Mark had escalated right back, smarter, faster, and ready for whatever came next. The evening air was heavy with tension. The sun hung low over the rooftops, casting elongated shadows across the cul-de-sac like warning signs. Mark stood behind his electric fence, chest tight with anticipation. This wasn't just another dispute anymore. This was a battle for control, respect, and ownership. The neighborhood had gathered on either side of the street, drawn by the escalating spectacle, their whispers and phone cameras adding fuel to the fire. Sarah, the HOA president, had arrived with a small army of allies, each one clutching clipboards, cameras, and phones. She was determined to prove that Mark had crossed a line, but he had prepared for this moment in ways they couldn't even imagine. Her navy blazer flapped slightly in the wind, her bob haircut perfectly framing the furious glare in her eyes. Mark, you think you can intimidate us? Remove that fence this instant or face legal consequences, she bellowed. Mark didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly lifted his hands, showing nothing but calm determination. I've already checked everything. Every single document, every ordinance, every property record. You want to argue? Go ahead. But this land belongs to me. All of it. The air was thick with disbelief. Some neighbors whispered support, while others exchanged nervous glances. Mark's dog barked, pacing along the edge of the fence, sensing the tension in the air. It was more than a pet now. It was a sentinel, a part of the line Mark had drawn between himself and those trying to overstep. Suddenly, a loud clatter erupted from the side yard. One of Sarah's allies had tripped on a loose garden hose that Mark had cleverly positioned earlier. Papers flew into the air like startled birds. Sarah shrieked, waving her arms as if trying to regain control. Mark suppressed a grin, knowing the chaos was in his favor. Every slip, every stumble was a subtle reminder that the fight had tilted. But he wasn't done. Mark pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. Immediately, the sprinklers along the perimeter of his property sprang to life, spraying arcs of water into the advancing group. The HOA members yelled, slipping and ducking, their cameras catching nothing but splashes. Even the neighbors lining the street laughed nervously, some hiding behind their fences, secretly cheering for Mark. As the chaos unfolded, Mark's eyes flicked to the small drone hovering overhead. He had spent weeks programming it, ensuring it could record every angle of the confrontation. From above, it captured the full scene. HOA members drenched, shouting and flailing, Mark standing firm behind the fence, calm and composed like a general surveying his troops. This footage would be irrefutable evidence if things escalated to court. Sarah, realizing her plan was unraveling, tried one final tactic. She stomped toward the fence, her voice cracking with fury. Mark, you are out of control. This is harassment. Trespassing. You will pay. Mark's gaze never wavered. I've done nothing but defend my property. You're the ones trespassing. And for the record, he added, pointing to the drone capturing everything, every move you make is being documented, legally and publicly. The small dog barked louder, running between Mark's legs and chasing the sprinkler spray, adding a surreal comedic element to the standoff. Some neighbors laughed. Others took videos on their phones, while Sarah's group struggled to regain their composure. By the time the sun touched the horizon, the neighborhood had transformed into a cinematic battlefield. Shadows danced across the street, the electric fence glinting in the warm orange light. The air was damp, the grass slippery, the paper scattered like confetti after storm. But Mark stood tall, unwavering. He wasn't just defending land. He was defending principle, asserting that no amount of intimidation, bureaucracy, or aggressive HOA tactics could force him out. As dusk settled, Sarah and her group retreated, soaked, frustrated, and furious. Mark's drone captured the retreat in glorious detail. The cul-de-sac fell silent, except for the gentle rustle of the evening breeze and the soft panting of Mark's dog. He lowered the remote, the sprinklers shutting off with a hiss, and surveyed his property. Every inch of land, every inch of victory, was his. But deep down, Mark knew this was far from over. The HOA wouldn't disappear quietly, and the neighborhood drama had only escalated. Tomorrow would bring new tactics, new confrontations, and new opportunities for both sides to test their wills. For now, though, Mark allowed himself a moment to savor the small victory. The fence stood, the boundaries were clear, and the message had been sent. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about respect, ownership, and the courage to stand firm in the face of relentless opposition. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the yard. Mark's dog laid down near the fence, finally calming, and Mark leaned against the gate, watching the sunset. A quiet determination filled him. The battle was not over, but tonight he had proven that he would never be intimidated. Chapter 5 closed with the calm after storm. The showdown at sundown was over, but the war for Mark's land, respect, and peace had only just begun. The morning after the sundown showdown, the neighborhood was buzzing like never before. Whispers and rumors traveled faster than the wind, carrying tales of Mark's defiance and the HOA's humiliating retreat. But Mark knew that the battle wasn't over. It had just shifted to a new, more dangerous arena, the courtroom. Sarah, the relentless HOA president, had already filed an official complaint. She claimed harassment, illegal property modifications, and intentional obstruction of neighborhood rules. She had recruited a lawyer, a sharp, intimidating woman with a briefcase full of paperwork, who promised to put Mark in his place. But Mark wasn't panicking. Over the past few weeks, he had meticulously gathered his evidence. Drones, motion-activated sprinklers, photographs, legal documents, and witnesses. Every chaotic scene, every misstep by the HOA was now meticulously documented. Mark spent the morning reviewing the files in his rustic cabin, the same one where the first confrontation had taken place. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the maps and property records he had spread across the table. He traced the boundaries with his finger, double-checking every legal detail. His dog sat at his feet, tail wagging lazily but alert, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. When Sarah arrived with her lawyer, the tension was palpable. They stepped onto Mark's driveway, the air heavy with anticipation. "Mark, this is your final warning," Sarah hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Remove that fence. Return the property to its original state, or face legal consequences you can't escape." Mark raised a hand, his tone calm but firm. "I've done nothing illegal. Everything on this property is mine, and every step you've taken against me has been recorded. You want a courtroom battle? Fine, but be prepared to see the evidence." The confrontation escalated quickly when one of Sarah's assistants attempted to cross the boundary line to snap photos of the fence. Mark, anticipating this, activated a small but effective deterrent. A remote-controlled sprinkler aimed perfectly to soak anyone who approached illegally. The assistant yelped and stumbled backward, soaked and humiliated. Even Sarah froze, realizing that Mark had anticipated their every move. But the most strategic part of Mark's plan remained unseen. Hidden cameras around the property, installed subtly over the past weeks, captured every interaction in crystal clarity. Every shouted warning, every slip on the wet grass, every desperate attempt by the HOA to assert control had been recorded. He had built a complete visual and legal record, a mountain of evidence that no HOA president could deny. By noon, the tension had spread beyond the property. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some supportive, some skeptical, all intrigued. Mark emerged from his cabin, dog at his side, and addressed the crowd. "This isn't about conflict," he said calmly. "It's about fairness. It's about knowing your rights and defending what's yours." Sarah's face turned crimson. She was trapped, not physically, but strategically. Mark had used every tactic at his disposal, and now the HOA's own aggressive approach would be their undoing. The drones hovered, capturing the scene from above, while hidden cameras provided side and street views, all feeding into a comprehensive record. As the day wore on, legal notices were exchanged. Mark's lawyer, a seasoned professional, reviewed the evidence and smiled confidently. "We have everything we need," he said. Your property rights are airtight, and every violation by the HOA is documented. The climax of the day came when Sarah attempted one last public spectacle. She stood at the edge of the street, attempting to rally the neighborhood and shame Mark. But as she shouted, the sprinklers activated once more, catching the HOA members off guard. Drone footage captured the chaos, and Mark's dog barked loudly, circling his master's feet. Neighbors couldn't help but cheer quietly, impressed by Mark's clever defense and composure under pressure. By sunset, the standoff had ended, not with a physical fight, but with a strategic victory. Mark's fence stood tall, intact, and unbroken. The HOA's threats have faltered under the weight of evidence, legal preparedness, and clever tactics. For the first time, Sarah seemed truly defeated. Not humiliated in the moment, but outmaneuvered entirely. As the light faded, Mark stood at the center of his yard, surveying his property. The electric fence glowed faintly in the twilight, a symbol of resilience and determination. His dog settled at his feet, tired but vigilant. Every step of the confrontation, every ounce of planning, had led to this moment. He had defended his land, his rights, and his peace, all without surrendering to intimidation or aggression. Chapter 6 closed with a sense of triumph, but also a lingering awareness. The HOA would regroup. They were persistent, relentless, and unwilling to accept defeat gracefully. But Mark was ready. He had built a fortress of strategy, evidence, and patience. And as the neighborhood lights flickered on, he knew one thing with certainty. This war wasn't over, but he had proven, beyond any doubt, that he would never back down. The night settled over the street, quiet except for the faint hum of the sprinklers and the occasional bark of the dog. Mark leaned against the fence, eyes scanning the horizon. The fight had escalated. Yes, but tonight, he had won, and the HOA would think twice before ever underestimating him again.